So most of the stuff is going to come out of Norman's, our accepted practices, and we'll probably spend quite a bit of time talking about what our accepted practices are in here, and then try to prepare you for where it's going, even though it still's got to go in the review process. But if you think about where we're at now, you know, we've got the ALS base, but we're trying to move towards the NFPA 1710 standard where we have a minimum of 43 people. So what would that do to our response? And what are we now? It clears out the core of the city.
Yeah. That's half the department on the ship.
But I mean, think about Heather Gardens. How many alarms do we go to? 3, right? I mean, equivalent of 3 once we start adding enough rigs, and that's what we needed for that fire. So instead we get that on the front end, so that's less for you guys to worry about as an acting officer. We get the right resources there, and we may still not have enough people to do what. That's just to fill kind of the correct spots. What happens when we have more stuff that comes up? All right, and some of NIMS. That's where divisions is really going to become important. Divisions in a high-rise is extremely important, and getting those divisions assigned early. We'll talk about identifying problems, determining the strategy and tactics, and our PPVs. So what is a high-rise? So the length of available ladders, which is our ground ladders, no, our aerial ladders. Okay, so 6, 7, 8 stories maybe. You know, we could 75 feet, right? So that's what we're going to define as a high rise. And you have to work from the interior. Does that mean everything's going to be done from the interior? I mean, you know, there might be an opportunity, like we talked about on Monday, where you have fire blowing out the windward side on the upper floor, and you can transition it from the exterior as maybe a crew's getting inside and investigating and getting to the correct floor. But predominantly everything's going to be done in those stairwells, inside, in the hallways from the interior. So standpipe or sprinkler system equipped 75 feet or taller. We talked about sprinklers earlier. You know, which ones do we hit? Same thing on the standpipes. And Peoria and I want to say just before, maybe it's Uvalde or something. There's an apartment complex on the right-hand side, so the south side. And each stairwell has its own standpipe. So not like Heather Gardens where you could hit the main FDC and it would fill the whole building and you could access any stairwell. Well, each stairwell over there has its own. So that just comes down to pre-planning. 1999 Broadway, which we don't have a building like that, but you know, you come up to Market Towers and you have FDCs across the front, 4 or 5 different inlets. They'll serve the whole building, but when you get to a taller building, and I don't know how if AIP is like this, if university has that or not, but you'll have it actually floored off. So 0 to 18, or might be 0 to 9, depending on the building, would be these 2, and then 10 to 18 will be the other 2. So that's something you want to pay attention to when you're depending on what you're supplying. Okay.
Jeff Keys said that the high-rise building also had to do with something with the HVAC systems. Were you with him when he was talking about that? Because I asked about the high-rise versus
like you're talking about pressurized stairwells? Talking about pressurized stairwells?
Or multifamily. I mean, we were talking about multifamily versus high-rise. Does anybody remember that conversation?
High-rise will have a common or shared HVAC, whereas multifamily apartment will have like individual
unit ones.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that from
That's what it
Norman's,
is.
or is that
What's that?
our definition of a high-rise?
We were discussing what Heather Gardens is. Is it a high-rise or a multifamily?
Right. Yeah.
And I think it came down to multifamily because of, one of the points he made of why it's multifamily is individual HVAC systems for the different units versus one for the whole building.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I would use that necessarily as a defining point, but it is one
was
of
just-
those things you need to consider. And how, and just like Cap started off with, we've got residential high rises, which are very, very different than the commercial high rises. And then we've got, really even within commercial, you've got stuff like Market Towers, and then you've got university and children's hospitals, which are completely different from Market Towers in a lot of ways. So it's just a lot of factors to consider. And, then the shared HVAC system could be really bad or it could be really good depending on where the fire is, do you have control of that system, that kind of thing.
So different types, your pre-World War II ones, what type of buildings are we talking about? Like, a lot of East Cost high rise, even some stuff, I don't know, what's the earliest tower downtown that was built? 40s maybe?
Maybe.
Is Fitzsimmons the old hospital considered?
I would say that's pre-World War II, right? Yeah. So,
Yeah.
That's in our area.
but then we've gone to a new, more or less, the core construction, That's what we've got now. So it's just a matter of getting in the building and identifying what type. But it's really not gonna change. I mean, it might change where your stairwells and elevators are located, but it's not gonna change your style of attack. You still need to locate those stairwells. You still need to find standpipes, set off divisions. Steel frame, there's concrete. CIP, what's that, like interior?
Cast in place.
Oh, okay.
So basically, they pour the floor, then they pour the columns, then they pour the floor, then they pour the columns all the way up, and then they infill. And for this one, they're putting non-structural steel joists in there, and then they'll cover probably with insulation and whatever. I don't know if that's the VA, but so they put stone facade on the outside of that.
So ventilation strategy, think about when you arrive at a high rise or residential, one of the first things you want to do after you locate the fire, you're going to have multiple stairwells, right? So what do you want to determine with those stairwells?
Which one's for attach and which one's for egress?
Yeah, and you might have an evac stairwell, you might get to determine that, or the residents there might determine that for you. So that's the other thing. And you might be working the same stairwell, you just never know. But if you can, then you want to use the stairwells and label those, and then you can work on your ventilation strategy based on that. Because if you're going to open up a stairwell and ventilate it, but that's your evac stairwell, then you're going to have problems, right? So that's even more reason to have more resources on scene to coordinate the ventilation with evacuation with fire attack. The HVAC system, if there's an engineer on scene, like I'm pretty sure if we had a fire at Market Towers, Earl, who's the engineer there, will be there. And he knows those things inside and out. The university has guys just like that as well. But when you show up at Heather Gardens, because it's residential, they've got security there and they've got keys to things, but they're not gonna really help you in what you need to get done.
Yeah, or 1470 Havana, same thing.
Right.
Is that something that we teach or that we're familiar with at all, that we can do, or no?
Actually reversing the fan, like
Right, like is that?
it's something we teach. I mean, if somebody's, sometimes the buildings
I've
have
never seen
panels
this, I
that
didn't know if it was like
will
a
actually
model.
reverse it, but that's gonna be like a building engineer thing.
Okay.
The best we could probably do is maybe shut down the HVAC system. If you've got it sucking in smoke and pumping it to multiple floors or something, you might, if you could figure it out, but a lot of those systems, especially the really big buildings, are so complex. They're way beyond what we can really manage, so it's pretty much shutting it down and trying to limit the spread that way. Has anybody been in the control center for university? It looks like a, I don't know, air traffic control center or something. Computers, and they can control every fan and every fire door and every light pretty much in the entire building. From
For all the buildings,
What's that?
for like all of those buildings.
Right. So getting control of that and getting somebody in there who can manage that is huge. Children's is similar, but from my experience, they generally don't have somebody there that really understands the system. So it's pretty complicated when you have an issue there.
Okay, so you're the first engine. Let's say you're dispatched to Iris, or you're the first engine. What are you think of some of the considerations when you first show up on scene? What are some of the tasks that you need to get done as a first arriving officer?
Locate the
And how are you going to do that?
Alarm panel, 360.
360 and straight to the alarm panel. Unless you see fire blowing out, but even then, you'd still want to locate the alarm panel because you might have fire blowing out a window on a floor, but then you've got smoke and flow alarms, maybe from sprinklers, on multiple floors. So go to that panel, get your Knox keys, do a 360 while your crew maybe gets all their high-rise gear ready, and then go to the panel and determine that. And that's why you can stage people away, with the exception of maybe the truck and the chief, and determine where it's at. And this is where it kind of gets gray and more discussion is, I mean, you probably should ask everybody what you guys think, because this policy says one thing as far as the space, and the new policy, who knows what that'll say. But what do you think the first arriving company or companies of the first alarm should be doing? Where should they be placed based on what you've read in our policies? And this is no right or wrong, but
I think you're setting the foundation, so you need to be command, established command post, base, whatever. Support your sprinkler system, and then the next engine company in, assign them to actually locate fire along with the truck company. And then just as resources are coming in, slowly plug them where you can. Hopefully, some of this big is your, I don't even know if tier 2 or type, what is the staging?
Level 2 staging.
Level 2 staging. You know, to kind of get everybody to hold up a bit before you can kind of do your stuff. But in here, it was saying something to the effect of, park it 200 feet away from the structure. So are you going to be on the outside or are you going to be on the inside type thing? But it really depends on your crew. Who can you trust to, go to the fire control panel to take care of that, or at least report back to you what that's troubleshooting or trouble mode. And just trying to get the information you can without losing big picture focus.
sure. Does anybody else, as a first two company, anybody else think might be one way to do it? I mean, would you go to the floor with your crew? Would you go to that floor you have with your crew? So you're the actor, and you go to the panel. Okay, it's the 4th floor, 5th floor, so you say the 5th floor.
I think I'd probably go into investigation mode and try to, especially if you don't have anything showing, try to locate which floor that fire is on. That way you can relay that information, because the next few rigs should assume command without at least have location of the fire.
Okay.
I know I'm gonna need sprinklers. I know I might need sprinklers / am going to need sprinklers. I know I'm gonna need somebody at the control panel. What I don't know is where the problem is. So maybe if I'm first there, go find the problem. Because I can tell other people, go to sprinklers, go to the panel. I know I can tell them that, and I know that that's something that needs to be done, but I don't know where the problem is. So first on, I'd probably go try to find the problem.
What does the policy say? The current policy say?
That makes sense.
First engine does what?
Secures the water.
Okay. Consider water supply and locate the fire.
Considered, check.
So basically you pull up and you make a decision. And the reason it's considered is because you pull up at University Hospital, the FDC is way down on if you call where kind of the south side is the Alpha side, it's on the Alpha Delta corner. But your control room is about midway on the Alpha side, where the old ERs used to be. So how do you do all of that as one crew? If you commit to the FTC, even as the officer, you're going to have to hoof it quite a ways to even get to the control panel. And once you're there, you're separate from your crew. You got a lot of issues. The way the policy basically is stated is you go to the panel, you figure out where the panel says your fire is, and then you go to the fire floor and figure out how big of a problem you've got. Because that's part of the problem with the high-rise stuff is is the sensory deprivation that you have from the outside looking in. You don't really know how much fire, how much smoke, how many floors are involved. All that stuff is pretty limited from the outside. So you get your starting point from the panel, and then you've got to get eyes on there. What do you guys think about going with your crew or staying down on the first floor in command, so to speak?
Well, you can send half your crew up to the fire floor, or a few floors below, with the truck, or truck company as well.
One thing to consider is how much equipment that you're gonna have to take up too. So if you split your crew or send some of them, I mean, that's a lot. With really the expectation should be that every crew that ascends the stairwell should ascend with the equipment like they're the first arriving engine, and all that equipment goes in staging. So knowing that, 4 people to share the load on forcible entry tools, pike poles, bottles, high-rise packs, 150 feet to 200 feet, 2.5. That's something to consider too. And experience inside that stairwell is going to be huge. Getting people to stop every couple floors and check layouts, getting people to check for smoke. What happens if you don't have a standpipe connection that you can use? Then what? So I would say that you could. I mean, right now, as of now, yes, you could take command. Hell, you could take command and send them up. But more eyes on it, the better, and more people to share the load. To get up there and really investigate and locate it, and then probably establish a division.
Would your
You might
thoughts
ask.
be the next coming in engine or the truck company coming in?
As far as who takes command,
Yeah.
I'll answer this, and then you can answer this.
The waters get really muddy through all of this, that's why.
Yeah.
So
I think in doing some in-services on B shift and the same type of things that we did on B shift are coming to C shift and A shift in the coming months, where we'll do repetitions like that. I think anybody part of the first alarm, with the exception of some officers and stuff, but everybody should be up to the division floor of the fire. So your first truck, your second engine, and your first engine should be going to that division 5 and working on that fire, if that's what you got. Battalion chief comes in, assumes command. You can use one of those officers, maybe the second truck officer, because even that second truck needs to go up to the floor below and be Rick. You're really moving a fire, and you're getting that's the hard part, is getting everybody up to the 5th or 6th floor, wherever staging is, and the fire floor, getting everybody up there with all the equipment. That's why it takes so long.
I agree. And part of what, for a lot of factors, getting eyes on that fire and figuring out how big of an issue and where it is huge, because that's going to set the stage for everything else that's going on. Got a lot of equipment to move, so being able to add an extra person. NIST and IFF did kind of became a PR thing, but they did an experiment, I think in Atlanta, on crew size. And the amount of work that you can accomplish and the time it takes you to accomplish that went up drastically between 3 and 4 people to a crew. I mean, drastically. And then slight increases for 5 and 6, but it was like 30% or something of an increase. So getting all 4 of you up there is a big deal for that. There is the downside if your additional units are delayed or something. But I think I agree with Kat, getting resources up there to start the process. And part of it is the reflex time. You know, if it's just a couple floors, not a big deal. You do 5, 6, 10, 15 floors, the time it just takes those 8 people, let's say, that first truck company and that first engine company, to get all the way up there, you may have your second alarm starting to arrive on scene if it was called an alarm. So it's super important to get bodies moving and equipment moving up there, is my feeling on it. And that's actually a big change for me, because I was a big advocate of leaving the engineer outside as kind of eyes on the scene and stuff until more things get set up. They can work on water supply, they can work on getting an aerial setup, that kind of thing. And then practicing a little bit, doing some reading, seeing that study, that kind of stuff really kind of changed my perspective. And that's where, I guess I mentioned it earlier too, that kind of the command thing gets a little wonky, because in a big fire like that, you'd assume that as the first-in officer, you would stop and take command, because that's what we do on almost everything that's very big. In this case, you're really grabbing your stuff and going, trying to get to that fire. Does that make sense?
So what do you do about water supply?
Well, the thought is that by the time you get up there and you can even think about using any water, you should have 1 or more additional units on scene.
Well,
You know,
like you talked about, some of the buildings have standpipes in different locations that access those particular buildings, so you wouldn't even know where to send that until you locate the fire, right?
Potentially.
If the panel just says 3rd floor.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, yeah, you look at some of the buildings, like on the Fitzsimmons campus, some of those buildings are huge. So 3rd floor is a big deal. If you've got the entire 3rd floor on fire, that's a whole different situation than just an office or a small section of the 3rd floor on the west end. You know, is a completely different game. So that's I mean, we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but so that's the A in the ALS base, is attack. So getting crews up to that fire floor, figuring out what you've got, and starting to put your fire attack into place.
Alright, so there we go. Alright. So ALS base, right, attack, fire, lobby control, base, unless at level 2 staging, it's probably going to be what you're going to see that. So
That's really just a change in terms. Level 2 staging, stage away. And if you're the first officer in staging, what do you do? You establish staging.
and stay with staging.
If you're on an engine and command asks for
Seriously.
an engine out of
A
staging,
lot to ask.
what do? You send one of the engines that you have in staging. You don't get on.
Can't reassign somebody, pass the
No.
baton.
And the reason I say that is that's been done more than once in recent history in our department. Is nobody wants to be stuck in staging, especially on, you get the fire in the century going, and everybody wants to be involved, and so the inclination is that you want to pass that, but really it's important to have somebody there consistently know what they've got, have a plan for deploying resources. So sometimes it stinks, and you never know. You might end up being part of the shuttle system for equipment, which I think I'd rather be staging than walking up and down the stairs with heavy stuff for the next 5 hours. So you just got to accept you and do your role.
So who's going to be lobby control? And policy, it says, that's really the expected job of the first arriving truck company officer. But it all depends on, do you have a lobby to control? So say like Heather Gardens, what do you have to control down there? Not much. So there might not be a reason to put lobby control there. Maybe to assist with evacuation, but that all depends on how close the stairwells are and access. So again, new policy being drafted. I have a feeling that a lot of that stuff will be cleared up. But there's obviously still going to be gray area too, and that's what, as an officer, that's what it's all about, is the gray area. I mean, these are guidance policies, to give you framework, but they aren't going to make every decision for you.
I mean, it's completely possible you'll show up on scene as the first truck company or the first engine company, and you may have a lobby full of people and people backed up into a stairwell full of smoke and hot gases and stuff. And maybe your first priority is getting people out of that lobby and out of that stairwell. I mean, that may become your first objective. Forget going up the stairs and trying to attack the fire. It just may be essentially lobby control at that point. You never know. So you just kind of, again, it's the framework to start from, and then you got to make good decisions based on what you're faced with.
I know you guys had a discussion when you're transmitting traffic. How important is the traffic that you're doing? Do they have a RIC scenario going? Probably not the time to say I'm arriving on scene. I could probably get out and do a face-to-face with the IC to let them know. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. There's a lot your MDC can do, and I think you have some MDC stuff later this week. But there's a lot your MDC can do as far as putting you on scene, clearing you of calls, seeing who else is coming, you can see where they're at with our GPS and with our maps. And a lot of times, we do this where we're going to fires. Where's 4's coming from? Where's 7's coming from? That to me is more meaningless radio travel. What's your location? What's your location? Pull up your map and see where they're at. And then you aren't clogging the lines of the radio on scenes. I think, would you agree with, especially on scenes, announcing you're on big scenes?
Yeah. I mean, I think even with the base and level 2 staging, I don't think there's any problem with just pulling up and going and reporting to the staging officer. The IC doesn't need to hear that you're on scene. The IC just says, staging officer's got it under control. If I need an engine, I'll call the staging officer and ask for an engine. If I need a truck, I'll call the staging officer and ask for a truck. They don't care if there's 15 or 2 in there, just as long as they can call and ask for what they need. So,
does dispatch move us to the specific channel for staging, or do we tell them we need to go to another channel?
I would say if you are part of that level 2 staging, you're the first one that's there, I'd be prepared to tell dispatch that where you're setting staging up, your location, and then you're moving. If you decide to move the TAC channel, this will be the TAC channel. Any additional resources you request for part of the second alarm need to go to this TAC channel. And then it would be your responsibility to communicate with the IC on the main TAC channel saying, I set up staging, I'll be on TAC 5. You can reach me on TAC 4, but I have all my other resources on TAC 5.
So how do you do that? If you're the staging officer, how do you manage that?
That's everybody that comes in, everybody that's dispatched?
Yeah, 2 radios. So you've got your radio on TAC 4 and grab the .5 radio or grab a crew member and say, okay, you listen to TAC 5 and I'll listen to TAC 4 or vice versa.
We call a staging officer, do you tell them, staging, this is command, I need an engine to the Charlie side, or you just tell me to get an engine and then tell that specific responding crew that you need the Charlie side?
If you know what, if you know what you want them to do, for sure, and especially that's, again, why it's nice to get those divisions or those groups set up really quick in an instant. You could just go, staging, I need an engine to report to Charlie Division.
So then as staging, you can go, hey, engine 15, you're going to Charlie.
Okay.
You report to Charlie Division. You by that point, you've tracked the resources so you know who's in charge of Charlie Division as a staging manager. And then you get back on, let command know that
The staging, obviously it's separate, but I mean, is the officer physically in staging, or is he next to the IC?
Physically, and I see him as physically in staging at that base staging location. We're talking about the
level,
away
yeah, we
staging,
should
right?
probably-
Way staging, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, level 2.
Level 2.
You're at that location. You might be the only one there too, because you might deploy your crew without you.
That's what I was gonna ask.
So,
I get that if you are assigned this, you have to stick with it throughout the duration, but maybe like a med 2, could they be assigned in this duty?
Could be.
Typically, our Med 2s are being used as like the medical branch for safety. So they have a lot more experience and more familiarity with the transport destinations, working with the BALC supervisor, that kind of stuff. So we tend to push in that direction. They're better equipped than the rest of us probably to manage that piece. So we tend to push. But it's possible if you don't have something else for them to do. It could be, if you're on a wildland fire, there's probably not a medical component to that. The Med 2 will probably get dispatched and probably show up. You could do, okay, Med 2, guess what? You handle staging out there on the highway and I'll let you know what I need.
So it's okay as the staging officer to split your crew, like, say you've got 3 of the rigs there, and you've got 3 personnel, you can maybe put one with each one, or send 2, make it a 5-person rig, or 6.
Could.
It wouldn't, that's not a problem.
I mean, that just is.
Because it's
any
what they need is
communication.
personnel up there.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you might get a request for, I need more personnel on Division 6 to help with search or something, and that's what I'm
Okay.
sending you the balance of Engine 11's crew. I'll stay in staging. And then, because they're gonna report to a supervisor up there anyways.
So, yeah, it just depends on conditions, again, if you got a really big incident though, you may need your crew. Because you may go, okay, engineer, you check in all the rigs that are coming in, make sure that we keep it running total, firefighter, you're in charge of the engines and other firefighter, you're in charge of the ambulances. And keep me posted on what you've got there and what their capabilities are. Because you might be getting, a crew from Bennett might end up showing up at University Hospital to help with our big fire. I don't know if it's going to be 3-4 people. I don't know, if they have a promoted officer. I don't know anything about their capabilities. Do they have saws and things like that? And so you may have to send one of your crew members over to get some of that information.
Might get through some of this part a little bit faster because we've already talked about it.
You guys doing okay? Do you need a break? After lunch is always the goal.
That needs a break.
Yeah.
Okay.
You mentioned
Come back at 2:15.
establishing ALS base, and then would you, I think you mentioned something about, let's say the fire's on the 4th floor, there's visible fire, would you assign yourself Division 4? Or would you wait for command to?
I would allow whoever ends up establishing the command post and doing all that stuff to make that decision.
Okay.
Because they may do a face-to-face with the second in engine and go, okay, I want you to go up there and meet up with Engine 11, and you're going to be Division 4. All right, any questions? Move over break.
Yeah, so we've really talked about all this in our discussion, so this might be actually a really good PowerPoint to distribute if it doesn't go up on SharePoint, because I think a lot of these early considerations are stuff that you need to think about. That if that's going in your thought process, then you're going to set the scene up for success. Okay, so first arriving engine company, sign to the floor, sign to the fire floor, but where are you hooking up?
Floor below.
All right, and that's one thing that as you go up the floors as an officer, hopefully somebody in crew maybe does it too, checking floors for layouts, right? Especially something like Heather Gardens or residential, because they're most likely to be exactly the same, right? And the commercial, you know, it could be divided. The whole floor could be Comcast, say, at Market Towers, and then another floor is all kinds of, 20 different businesses. But in residential, it's going to be the same. So where you have zero visibility on the 6th floor to look maybe on the 4th or 5th, depending on how bad the visibility is there, then you can see, okay, I'm coming out to the lobby area, and I got a hallway that way and a hallway that way. That's going to help you out as far as orientation is concerned. So as you ascend the stairwell, that's where you want to go. Now we say set up standpipe operations 2 floors below, but you might not always be able to do that. What would stop you from being able to set up 2 floors below, or I'm sorry, 4 below standpipe operations?
What would possibly?
Yeah, what are some things that would prevent you from doing that?
Maybe the smoke conditions are so bad with smoke.
Okay. I mean, you may not, who knows, right? Or in that case, I mean, you just have to see how bad it is and make the call that, all right, we're going to go in here, but we're going to set up in the stairwell. Could be simple as something, a door to the stairwell is open, but you might not have an outlet that's good either, right? Standpipe's good, but the outlet's bad. Okay? So that's where you got to audible and say, all right, how bad are the conditions? Where else can we hook up?
2 floors below.
2 floors below?
2 floors.
You could, I mean, you could hook up on the fire floor. I mean, that's a possibility, depending on if it's isolated. It's a risk, right? Yeah, I mean, take, say, Market Towers, for example, all the outlets are actually out on the floor. That's going to change your decision whether if it's actually in the stairwell. There's a possibility that you might have to go to another stairwell. What's the other stairwell look like? It's all these things that, how much time is that going to take, right? So think about that as far as standpipe connections, where you're going to set up, where you're going to drop your stuff in staging, how you're going to set up, how you're going to deploy the hose. So the new standpipe, there will be actually a standpipe policy that will be referenced in high-rise, and it might be referenced in multifamily too, I'm guessing, because it just pertains to standpipes, and some of them are, like, you would reference a standpipe policy either in high-rise or high-rise residential, high-rise commercial, okay? And a lot of stuff in there will be where to hook up, where the second line goes. What if you're putting a backup line in place on a standpipe? Where you hook that up? Let's say the primary line is on the floor below. Where's your backup line getting hooked up? 2 floors. Okay. So as you can see, we're doing those switch out here at training with all the hose and appliances, stuff like that. Those of you that have those 2.5 to 2.5 gated Ys on your rigs know those limitations. Those should never even go in a high-rise structure.
The 2.5 to 2.5?
Any gated Y, to be honest. I mean, you could use it going 2.5 to 1.75 for one line. The main thing is that 2.5 to 2.5 gated Y promotes one line into 2. And we talked about it on B shift, but also you guys will get the same training on CNA. What's the downfall of having a 2.5 to 2.5 gated Y? When you're coming off a standpipe outlet.
May not be getting enough GPM, right?
Yeah,
Or pressure.
So you're flowing one line. How much GPMs do you want out of 2.5? Let's just say you have, it doesn't even matter pressure. How many GPMs do you want out of 2.5?
On average. 300.
250 to 300, right? We'll go with 300, okay? So 300 you want out of that. So to get that out of your hose, you've got to set your standpipe outlet in that 85-ish range, okay? 85. So you're gating it down, you're flowing, right? So what happens when you add a second line off that gated Y that's got the same line coming off the standpipe that goes to 2.5 gated Y? You've set it for 300 GPMs out of the one line. Now somebody hooks up a second line to it and opens up.
Just lost half your pressure.
So now I'm splitting 300 GPMs between two lines. So how do I fix that?
Increase
Increase your
pump
pressure.
At the gate, right?
Mhm.
Okay, pump pressure up, right? Now what happens when I bump the pressure up, right? Now I've set it for 600 GPMs to come out of there, right?
Oh, I pulled out.
I shut down, one side shuts down because they're advancing. Now what happens?
Rodeo.
Yeah, I got 600 GPMs on one side, right? Not gonna happen. So that's why there's never, you have to think just like our engine, right? Any line that comes off our engine has a gate and has a gauge. And any line you put in a high-rise building has to have a gate and a gauge. Each line. So you hook up to a gate, it can have one gauge on it and one line on it. Now you could get, I mean, you could use the 2.5 to 2.5, and you could come off the standpipe outlet, and then you could put two gauges on the floor next to the shafts at 2.5 to 2.5. You know, you could.
Yeah.
Really? I mean, in what kind of environment, you know? So the industry standard is 1 floor below for the first line, 2 floors below for the second line. And you could possibly, for that second line, if it is your backup line, you've made progress on the fire, then maybe you move to the fire floor with that. So just know, you have a 2.5 to 2.5 gated Y on your engine. I go back and start asking questions of how we're using this. And some crews are putting it on the back of the rig and they're, one line or the other. I get that. You 1 3/4 freaking out to the back or 2.5 freaking out. But if it's in your high-rise bag or going up as part of your equipment, you need to start asking questions of why that's there. What's the point of this?
And you're saying there shouldn't be a wide period in the high-rise bag.
Well, you could use them. That's the point when you start fighting residential, you might need that 1 3/4. You might say this is going to be our, I've identified floor 6 and it's a kitchen fire. Okay, it's right off the stairwell. You might gate down and do that.
I
Personally,
see what you're
me,
saying
other
for
guys,
high-rise.
what's that?
For high-rise, it shouldn't be going
No.
up. Okay.
No, and you might on a residential high-rise.
Right, that's where I was
Because-
confused. That makes sense.
Yeah, because
Pretty
they're
sure
very
Chris
two
is gonna
different.
take them out.
So what is a residential high-rise?
I think Chris Shannon's gonna
Structurally,
take
what
them.
is it?
It is, yes.
It's still compartmentalized.
It's in that last memo.
Yeah.
So the only difference between, high-rise, residential high-rise and just a multifamily is the fact that you're so far off the ground, you gotta come through the inside as opposed to climbing a couple flights of stairs or hoisting a line or whatever. So yeah, you got generally a small compartment, it's got firewalls around it, if the door, especially if the door's closed, it's very contained. 1 3/4 should be enough to handle that. As opposed to a commercial like Market Towers, some of those is just a sea of cubicles inside a couple thousand square feet of open space. And you definitely need a 2.5 or something like that.
You should think of your gated Ys as a reducer and not so much a way to get 2 lines into play. So when you think about apartment lays, same concept applies. If I take a 2.5 with the gated Y, it's 2 3/4, same thing. Because a lot of times, when for the first 3 or 4 years, when we were talking apartment lays, it was just like, okay, the second engine that gets there, grab their packs, and you go set up a backup line off the gated Y. But it's the same concept. I'm getting 150 to 200 GPMs out of here, and I'm pumping that. If I add another one, I lose that. And then if I shut one down, if I adjust the pressure, and that's just not feasible for an engineer to keep adjusting pressure.
And if that 1 2.5 goes, then the whole operation
Right.
is shut.
It's not really a backup line, right? So hopefully we'll get an in-service out across all shifts where we talk about apartment lays, and to where your apartment lay, I would say even a high-rise, if you actually decide I'm not going to use a standpipe, and I'm going to actually lay in the stairwell with 2.5, then your backup line is the same thing. It's another 2.5 to another gateway or a reducer. But I encourage you to go ask questions if it's still on your radar. Because it's nothing that, I don't want to say dangerous, I mean, it can be. But usually some of the crews that are using it in high rise just don't quite understand the concept. You gotta get out and flow it, you gotta get out and see what it does. When you flow them next to each other and you open two lines and you only are pressurized for one, 15 feet of reach maybe, and nothing coming out, so you just get killed. So if the first engine company hasn't been able to get a water supply, then that's your second engine company and supply and standby, sprinklers, whatever, if you can supply both. So unless you get assigned by command, most likely if command hasn't arrived and a third engine comes on scene, then that's going to be up to you. Like Cap said, even though you're in investigation mode and you might be ascending the stairs with your crew and nobody else is taking command, like the BC's not on scene, then you're still kind of really in command, and those rigs that get on scene are going to communicate with you. So you've got to have a plan for them. So if you're the third engine on scene, then that's who you're going to communicate with. Pay attention to the radio traffic of who's where, who's assumed what role, and then you can ask, hey, engine 11, I'm arriving on scene as a third engine, what's your assignment for me? But if an IC's there, then you can just report it. So we talked about this a little earlier. The policy states that first truck company officer will assume lobby control if not assigned. But what happens if you're the first truck? You're the first rig as a truck. And what's to control in the lobby? That's something that, as Cap said, I'm instituting ALS space. It's easy if you know the building and you know there's really nothing, like Fletcher Gardens, there's not much there that you're going to control in the lobby. Then you might say, you could even say I'm missing ALS space, but bypass the lobby control. I mean, something, it's going to be using plain English to communicate your plan if that's what you decide to do.
And one of the things we, as a department, are really going to have to face with that, and one of the concerns about some of the things in this policy is, it's very likely that you will sit in the front right seat as the acting officer. Your engineer may have 2 years on the job, and your two firefighters may be lucky to have 2 years on the job together, especially for the medics in here. That's the absolute reality for our department over the next few years. I can tell you, I would not feel comfortable stopping in the lobby and going, hey, I know you've got 5 years between the three of you, but climb those five floors and hook up to the standpipe and take a shot at that fire, okay? It's not fair. It's not fair to anybody. So you may be a situation where you go, look, I can't. You tell the IC, in a face-to-face, I need to be with my crew. Or our entire crew's gonna stay as lobby control and we can send another crew up there.
One thing I've always thought about on a high-rise fire where you don't have all these engine trucks readily available to have RIC packs is if you are assigned a RIC, you're not carrying up, instead of carrying up hose like every other company that goes up, you're carrying up forcible utilities, you're carrying up retic, you're carrying up search bags, stuff like that. Get another RIC pack off another engine or another squad or truck there and take that up with you. You got 4 people, so you can take 2 RIC packs up. It's one, and if we're solving things from the inside out, a second RIC pack might be exactly what you need. So just something to think about as far as altering your equipment selection based on the role before you climb.
Something that truck two did on our last training with the Rick stuff is, talked about just bringing a second SCBA.
Another bottle with them?
Yeah, just the whole unit itself.
Oh, yeah.
To, then you can just hook that, put, you know,
Your
take off the
0.5
one
pack.
that's failed, or if that happens, and put that on them.
Sure.
And just stick it right on the front of them, hook it, and
I think there's a lot of logic to that.
we're
Having
most
been-
familiar with those.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And the reality is, from my experience, being on the air team for a while and stuff, our face pieces, I've seen one that got run over by Tower 14. And it was misshapen, but it was intact. So the reality of you getting hit in the face in the middle of a fire hard enough to break your face piece
not
and
your
need to
head.
replace it is pretty minimal and not sustain a life-ending injury, basically. So the reality is, if somebody gets in trouble, chances are it's going to be because they ran out of air, basically, or they got trapped, or something like that. So bringing an SCBA, extra CBA, and using the ESS, or swapping regulators, you know, so if they get a line cut or something by falling debris, you could just swap the regulator and get them back on air with that pack. And it is, the reality is it's a lot easier to carry one of those than those new Rick packs. They don't have all the features, unfortunately, but it is a very viable option. For sure.
One thing that happened on Heather Gardens, if you were Rick, that Lieutenant Steven did a good job of is, and we don't think about it, because we don't have that many Rick deployments, but immediately when he got deployed, he asked for a backup Rick team, which we didn't have in place. So it might behoove you on the front end to make sure the backup team, hey, okay, copy that, I see. We are reporting to whatever floor assigned as Rick. Please let me know when you have a backup Rick team in place, because that backup Rick team might become part of the primary Rick team.
Was that when they were just assigned or when they were activated?
They were actually climbing the stairs, and before they even got to staging, they got activated. And that's what he said, copy. He actually heard the Mayday go out and said, Tower 8 copies the Mayday, send a backup Rick team. Okay, so, because think about the in-service we just did, something like that, by the time you get him packaged or her packaged and you get everything solved and you get that report back and start moving back, that's when it would be nice to have a backup Rick team there to finish the job if you need it or you need more help to go out. Won't spend too much time on this, but if you were to take command, if for some reason BCs are out and you know you're the third or fourth company to arrive and the officers have ascended to the fire floor, then guess what? Now you are pretty much the BC, you're the IC, taking command on the outside. So you've got to set up your incident action plan, and you've got to set up where your rigs are going, set up staging, all that. All your benchmarks, that's what I would say. So one thing about high-rise is, you know, you're going to have those benchmarks, but you're going to have benchmarks, or even residential, you're going to have benchmarks for every floor. Starting with what? The fire floor, and then what? What floor is next? Floor above, and then what after that? Top floor, and then move in between. So with something like Heather Gardens, it was the top floor, then that's it. So we're 6. So we've obviously started moving down below if we had any smoke. I think we had smoke on the 5th and 4th floors.
Yeah, we had almost enough on the 5th floor that we almost stopped hooking up.
If you're assigned to rehab, that's just right next to staging if there's room. But again, that's where your equipment complement is going to change, right? If you're rehab, then what kind of stuff are you bringing up? Still bring up a bottle. You never know what you got to do, right? But you're going to bring up your med equipment. If you can, I mean, hopefully by that time there's an elevator that you can use, or you can shuttle water if that's what you're gonna need. So this is exactly, Jeff Keys was the second BC arriving, right? So he was assigned into Heather Garden, so that was appropriate. And he eventually at one point took over Division 6. So just be aware that you could be relieved by another officer as a division supervisor. You could actually be relieved by a BC that moves interior and takes over that. And then you would report to him. Incident management team will automatically respond, and they could assume any role to answer. Aaron, that was your question. So if an incident, get a question if the incident management team showed up, could they take over staging? And who knows? You know, I think there's enough tasks going around, probably around the command post. And like Cap said, if we have a big fire, we're probably going to be reaching out to mutual aid resources. We're going to be reaching out to city resources that might need to be coordinated. That staging is probably not on their list. Medical stuff is probably not on their list. So they're probably going to be busy.
How big of an operation would it have to be for us to use that and get it down in 15? It's more like Wildman, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Just
Something
it's
that's
your
gonna be
request.
hours long.
Yeah.
The biggest issue is getting it there in a timely fashion.
So if we have multiple organizations coming, is that when you would utilize it, or? I've never seen it used.
I don't think we ever have it.
Yeah,
We
we
should
should
use it.
The
Time
theater
we-
shooting?
By the time we were going to use it, it was over.
Well, they only have it at the gas department.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They
he
did,
uses
didn't
it
they?
Yeah,
for
we
his
had
guys
there.
and stuff.
Yeah.
We were out there for like 2 days.
Yeah.
Who deploys it? Like, who drives it? Can we drive? We don't have anybody that can drive it, right? I mean,
Sure,
Three man tank.
probably bring it or somebody pick it up.
I think PD has to bring it. I
Yeah,
don't
'cause
think
there's-
we have really access to it.
yeah, it's some kind of different driving that's required for it.
I don't know. I've never seen an AFR person drive it or even practice driving it, so.
Because it's a whale.
Getting up for side road.
Were you guys empowered to drive it at 13s?
I rode in there, and like I said, we did brake checks, we started it up, went through little braking lights and everything else, so I would imagine we could. Haven't heard that we couldn't.
Just don't
Yeah,
crash.
probably not something you
Yeah,
would.
crash.
You'll be fine.
But basically, as an acting officer, it might be something. I mean, you get a good fire in one of these structures, and it's cold out or something. Might be something to just throw out to the IC as a suggestion. But you won't. I wouldn't worry too much about ordering something like that.
You're obviously used to IC charts by now. You know, I'd worry about the operations side at this point. And maybe, you know, you can worry about logistics and you might be assigned rehab or med branch. But I would just worry about groups and divisions, getting your accepted practice.
I think with all of these, the biggest thing is just understanding kind of that first alarm assignment, so you know what, as you're coming in, basically what you're supposed to do, and then just taking in the information that you see and making good decisions with it. We were talking about just fire attack in general, but there is no black and white right or wrong answer to any of this. And that's what makes it kind of fun, but also most challenging. You know, like we talked about, generally if you're first in, you're going to that fire floor. Check the panel, go to the fire floor. But if there's a bunch of people injured, maybe you make the decision that you're gonna start EMS for these people. Maybe you're gonna just focus on evacuation. Maybe you decide, you know what, there's there's that weird research building that university won't even hardly let us walk into. You show up and they go, nope, we got it. You know, you just stand outside and wait for them to tell you it's okay. They handle the problem. Maybe you just go, you know what, I don't know what's going on up there, but it looks bad, so we're gonna park over here and supply the FTC and keep those sprinklers doing their thing up there, because it's not safe for us. There's a million directions you can go with it. Just make good decisions, know kind of what the general game plan is, so once somebody starts it in that direction, or you start in that direction, you know what those first units are going to do. And that's all the way down to the task level. You know, I think some departments have gone to something where nobody can operate above the fire floor, or nobody's supposed to be above the fire floor until you have a line operating on the fire floor. And that came from, I mean, New York had a couple firefighters get that killed maybe, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, some of that stuff. I think the reality is it's up to the officer to make a good decision. You pull up there and there's smoke pushing through around that door, and the door looks like it's starting to form from the heat and stuff. Yeah, you may want to just lay your line out on the floor below, get as straight as you can. Yeah, it's going to be a heck of a pull to get that up the stairs and onto the fire floor, but that's the right thing to do. You get there, it's a good solid fire door. You're not seeing a lot of smoke pushing around it. Door's not hot. There's no reason why you can't flake that hose up above and back down like you were taught in the academy. It's just about making those good decisions and having that thought process for it. Make sense?
I think, remember, a big part of being an officer, I mean, everything's, you gotta make decisions. Sometimes depending on your crew, you just gotta get out of the way and facilitate. So you don't have to be the guy or the girl that has all the answers. You've got people on your crew that you can lean on in a situation like this, then you just gotta facilitate. You gotta communicate on the radio, you gotta communicate a plan, and, you know, kind of just let the train roll down the hill, you know. It's not, that doesn't have to be everything through you. You know, you just gotta make sure it's going the right way, but you don't have to control everything. Does that make sense?